I was reading these articles in Newsweek, in Time magazine, New York Times, Wall Street Journal about Singapore having this makeover, Marina Bay Sands and Resorts World Sentosa and Southern Ridges and Punggol and all Sengkang Riverside Park, and all these changes were happening to Singapore while I was away. So it was like being dumped by a girlfriend who you thought was okay, but she was a bit dumpy and a little bit unattractive. And then you go somewhere else and you see this girlfriend get this really sexy makeover in the newspapers and the magazines, and you get a bit jealous and you think maybe we shouldn't have split up. Maybe we should get back together. And that's how it started. That's what convinced me to, that was the first step in me coming back to Singapore. One day I was terminally bored in Australia, so I dug out my old map, my old Singapore map that was about 10, 12 years old, and I put it out on the wall. This is true, this really happened. And then I opened up my laptop and I went onto Google and I Googled Singapore's map, current map. So I was looking at a Google map of Singapore today and my old map of Singapore 10, 12 years ago. It was two different worlds. It was two different countries. And that's when I got the idea that for the first time ever, you could write a book, a travel humor type book of a country. The same country that you wrote a book about 5 years ago, only 5 years ago, and see only new places or places that have been extensively renovated or transformed or changed, like Sentosa, for example. Obviously, Sentosa existed 5 years ago, but it's completely different now. So this new book, Return to a Sexy Island, is my tour, my return tour to Singapore, examining new Singapore, a world that did not exist 5 years ago. And at first, I'll be honest, I thought, could I really fill an entire book, 280 pages, 85,000 words? Could I fill an entire book with content, places that didn't exist 5 years ago? And not only did I do it, I could have wrote 2 books. There is no country in the world, in my opinion, where you could travel from one part of it, go right around the country, write a book, go away 5 years, come back, write an entirely newer book without repeating any content from the first book. You couldn't do it. There's no country in the world that has transformed that fast in 5 years. And not only is it transformed, it's transformed at a time when there's a global economic downturn. And yet despite that, Marina Bay Sands, Resorts World Sentosa, Southern Ridges, Sengkang Riverside Park, Bishan Park, Waterway at Punggol, and many, many other places that I go to in this book. A whole new sexy island that did not exist 5 years ago. And that's essentially what Return to a Sexy Island is about. The sexiest place in Singapore, I would probably have to pick 3 for different reasons. Universal Studios, because I'm a big kid. I love Universal Studios. It just you know what Universal Studios has, right? Universal Studios has the wee factor. That's all it has. Have some damn fun. Get away from the assessment books, get away from the textbooks, get away from the overtime, get away from the kiasu, get away from the stress, get away from the traffic jams, and just have a bit of wee. Just take your kids down, get on the roller coaster, and have some fun. There's nothing about Universal Studios other than fun. So I love that side of Universal Studios. I mean, that's sexy. Second thing, Bukit Brown Cemetery. It's very sexy to me for what it represents, about what I said to you earlier, the changing mindset. This is sexy to me. When I went to Bukit Brown Cemetery in Singapore, young people everywhere, young teenagers, young adults, polytechnic students, university students, college students, who were giving up their own time voluntarily to monitor and to document and chronicle the graves that are earmarked to be destroyed, right? They were mapping out the sites for a project. They were recording the heritage for history, for posterity, for heritage. In other words, they were active citizens of Singapore. They're getting off their backsides, they're getting off the PlayStations, and they're going into Bukit Brown Cemetery, and they're actively campaigning to preserve Singapore's heritage and history forever. To me, they are sexy Singaporeans. I told them that, and I think that scared them, because most of them were men. But I said, you are sexy guys to me, because you represent Singapore's future. 10 years ago, heck care. What do I care about a cemetery? Get rid of it. Extend the highway, good. I get to work faster. What do I care about a cemetery? None of my family are buried there. What do I care about Bukit Brown Cemetery? But there is a growing number of Singaporeans who do care, who want to be involved. They want to be included in their society. They want to have a say in Singapore's future. So I found Bukit Brown very sexy for that. The other thing, Punggol. I love Punggol. And I know Punggol 20 years ago was smelly pig farms, but now Punggol is sexy because it is a new town and it is being regenerated and established in the right way. I went to Tree Lodge at Punggol, which is an eco-friendly, Singapore's first eco-friendly HDB estate, housing estate, right? And it's magnificent. Most of the lights are solar powered. They've got 2 rubbish chutes, one for regular refuse rubbish, one for recycling. Every HDB block should have that from now on, right? One for rubbish, one for recycling. They've got this green membrane, that's all I can call it. It's like a green skin of plants and shrubbery down the blocks. So instead of it being ugly concrete, it's green, you know, because you've got these green hanging plants coming down. It gives you shade, it gives you shelter, and if you've got shade, you're blocked from the sun, you don't need to use your aircon so much, which brings the power down. So it is Singapore's first eco-friendly, power-saving estate. That is the future of Singapore, and it's built on Punggol Waterway. So you've got this beautiful place for your family to run, cycle, play, jump, kayak, whatever. So everything about Punggol is sustainable. It's urban redevelopment, yes, but you're trying to manage the population. You're trying to manage how many things you use. You know, you're trying to manage your sustainability. It is the future of Singapore. It is a sexy town. Well, I'll be honest, I was a bit of a dinosaur for a long time. And I always grew up, oh, it has to be, you know, printed. But I'm changing my mind because when I was growing up as a kid, I couldn't afford to buy books. You know, frankly, I was quite poor growing up. So I usually relied on the library. But I think that ebooks is a wonderful alternative because always, ebooks are a bit cheaper. That's the first thing. The second thing is, what does Singapore not really have? Space. That's the reality. You know, Singapore just doesn't have enough space. So what you don't have in Singapore so much that you do in bigger countries is huge book collections. You know, because people can't. They just don't have the physical space. And on top of that, the humidity kills books very quickly. You know, that's the reality. I mean, I went through 5 VCRs when I was in Singapore because the heads kept getting moldy, right? So if you keep a book on a shelf in Singapore with no aircon, in direct sunlight, you'll be lucky if you get 3 or 4 years before it starts turning yellow and, you know, and so on. So you've got no space. The weather is not really good for books, and also the ebooks are a bit cheaper. So I think you've got 3 good reasons there. 3 good reasons for Singapore in particular to get on to ebooks. And also, if I'm a Singaporean student, and you know how many textbooks Singaporean students have to carry in their backpacks. You see these little 10-year-old, 8-year-old kids, you know, and they're dying under the weight of 15 textbooks in their bag. You put those 15 textbooks into an e-reader, and suddenly there's no more backpack. And not only that, of course, with those kinds of books, or even my books, you can write in the margins, you can add new content, you can update it, you can constantly revise it, improve it, you know, change it, update it, add in new information, which of course is much harder to do in a physical format. So I think physical books and ebooks can live side by side. I think there are qualities to both, but I definitely see ebooks having a big future in Singapore. That is brilliant. That is where an ebook has true potential, and an ebook website like yours has wonderful potential to help boost, promote local writing, because a bookstore, as I mentioned earlier, has finite space. There's only so much space a bookstore can have, and a bookstore obviously must be commercially viable. So much your website, but you know, a bookstore must be commercially viable. So in a regular bookstore, you're going to stack it high with the Harry Potters and the John Grishams and the Jason Bournes and so on, right? And Jodi Picoults and all of these authors, because they sell. They are international best-selling authors. So you've got to stock them. So what happens? The space for local authors who are trying to establish themselves, who are trying to make a name for themselves, they struggle to find space on the shelf of a bookstore. You do not have that problem on your website. You can stock as many local authors as you want. You can put the spotlight on as many Singaporean authors as you want because you have infinite space. You know, you can put 1,000 Singaporean authors on there, and more to the point, you can make their books cheaper. You know, so because you don't have printing costs, so you not only can you give them the space, you can give them an opportunity, you can give them the chance to establish themselves, and in most cases their books are going to be cheaper. So it is a wonderful, wonderful platform for local writers to establish themselves. And the great thing about your website, of course, like all websites, it doesn't stop at the border of the causeway. You know, you don't have to show your passport once you get past the causeway of your website. Your website goes all over the world. So a first-time Singaporean author writing his first novel or his first non-fiction book can put his book on your website, and someone in Canada, whether it's a Singaporean or someone who has an interest in Asian literature or Asian books, someone in Canada, someone in London, someone in Sydney, it doesn't matter where. One click, he's got your book. He's got your book on his e-reader. 5 minutes later, he's reading your book. Your first Singapore publication, a Singaporean author being read in Sydney, Shanghai, anywhere else, Vancouver, London, is being read almost immediately overseas. That is where this website has wonderful potential for local authors to get their work published and to establish themselves not only locally but on the international stage. And I think it's a wonderful opportunity for Singaporean writers to get out there and get their names out there. So get writing and get your books on this website next to mine.